Hemingway and his legend in the early morning hours of a summer day in 1961, in a house tucked into the dry, sun-baked hills of Ketchum, Idaho, a shotgun blast cut through the total quiet. The sound did not echo long. It did not carry far across the pine ridges and the empty meadows. It stopped sharp and final, like a period stamp hard at the end of a long, crowded, impossibly vibrant sentence. The man who pulled the trigger was Ernest Hemingway. He was 61 years old. He had lived more lives than most men could live in 3 lifetimes. He had been a newspaper reporter with calloused fingers from typing straight through deadline pressure. He had been an ambulance driver in a war that broke every young man's illusion of glory. He had been a soldier without a uniform, a foreign correspondent walking through bomb streets and unquiet borders. He had hunted big game under the hot African sun, tracking lions and kudu across red dirt plains, standing steady when the wind shifted and the animal turned to face him. He had fished the great, dark seas off the coasts of Florida and Cuba, leaning over the gunwale of a small boat for hours, waiting for the heavy pull of a marlin on the line. He had been a bullfight aficionado who sat in the hard stone seats of Spanish plazas de toros, watching the slow, ritual dance of man and beast, learning to read every small movement of the matador's cape, every flinch of the bull's shoulders. He had been a drinker of legendary capacity, the kind of man who could sit in a Paris bar or a Key West tavern through long nights, talking quiet, hard talk while others grew loud and sloppy. He had been a brawler who took punches and threw them, who settled arguments with fists instead of words when words felt weak and useless. He had been a lover, a husband 4 times over, a father to 3 sons, a wanderer who never stayed rooted to one place long enough to let the dust settle on his chairs. But above all, and through every single one of these lives, through every scar and every hangover, every quiet victory and every brutal loss, he had been a rider Doris a rider. He changed the way the world thought about the American sentence. He stripped language down to its bones and its lean, working muscles. He cut away every useless adjective, every flowery phrase, every empty rhetorical flourish that cluttered the truth. He taught plain English how to move with a new kind of grace and a brutal, unshakable power. He did not write to impress. He wrote to record. He wrote to make the reader feel the weight of a moment without telling them what to feel. In time, he became a legend. It is a word we use too easily for actors and athletes and fleeting celebrities. But in his case, the legend was not built on publicity or hype. It was carved out of living tissue, out of years of sweat under foreign suns, out of blood from war wounds and boxing cuts, out of endless pages of black ink on white paper, and finally, out of the dry gunpowder of that final morning in Idaho. To understand what Hemingway means to literature, to understand why his voice still rings clear and strong decades after his death, you have to start with the pure sound of his prose. You cannot read his work quickly. You have to slow down. You have to hear the sentences in your head, one after another, steady and unrushed, like footsteps on a hard road. You have to feel the rhythm before you can grasp the meaning. Listen closely to the opening passage of A Farewell to Arms, a passage so famous it has become a tuning fork for all modern English writing. It is simple on the surface. It is almost deceptively plain. But every word is necessary. Every detail stays with you long after you finish reading. In the late summer of that year, we lived in a house in a village that looked across the river and the plain to the mountains. In the bed of the river there were pebbles and boulders, dry and white in the sun, and the water was clear and swiftly moving and blue in the channels. Troops went by the house and down the road, and the dust they raised powdered the leaves of the trees. The trunks of the trees too were dusty, and the leaves fell early that year, and we saw the troops marching along the road, and the dust rising in leaves, stirred by the breeze, falling, and the soldiers marching, and afterward the road bare and white except for the leaves. You hear it immediately when you let the words settle. The rhythm is hypnotic. It moves forward without hurry, without pause, linked over and over by the simple conjunction and. It is a paratactic flow, old and almost biblical in its steady accumulation of small, unignorable truths. One thing happens, then another, no single moment emphasized above the rest. There is nothing simple about the effect this creates. The slow stacking of specific, physical details builds a world that is utterly real, utterly specific, and yet strangely dreamlike in its quiet repetition. You can see the white, sun-baked pebbles in the riverbed. You can taste the fine dust in the dry air. You can watch the leaves drift down one by one while the soldiers march past, their boots thudding on the hard road. War hangs in the background of the scene, heavy and inescapable, but it is never shouted about. It is never described with grand words or dramatic speeches. It is simply present. It lives in the dusty tree trunks and the early falling leaves. It lives in the endless line of marching men. It lives in the empty white road left behind after the troops have passed. This was the Hemingway revolution in writing. He did not explain emotion. He did not state grief or fear or longing outright. He showed the thing itself. He showed the concrete, visible world. He trusted that the raw, unspoken emotion would live and breathe in the empty spaces between the words. In the silence the reader fills with their own understanding. He once summed up his entire writing method with one of the most enduring metaphors in all of literary history, a metaphor that defines modern prose more than any other single idea. If a writer of prose knows enough of what he is writing about, he may omit things that he knows, and the reader, if the writer is writing truly enough, will have a feeling of those things as strongly as though the writer had stated them. The dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of it being above water. This is the iceberg theory, the quiet foundation of every story, every novel, every sentence he ever wrote. The visible words on the page are only the small tip of what the writer knows, what the writer has lived through, what the writer has felt deeply enough to hold back. Beneath that small, visible tip lies a vast, submerged mass of unspoken meaning, unshared memory, unacknowledged pain. It is a theory of deliberate omission. It is a theory of strict restraint. It is a theory that respects the intelligence of the reader, refusing to spoon-feed emotion or explanation. It is also a theory of quiet toughness. It refuses to sentimentalize. It refuses to over-explain. It embraces a stoic silence that understands the most important human truths cannot be spoken directly. They can only be witnessed. They can only be felt, in the gaps between sentences, in the unsaid, in the quiet weight of what is left out. People often wonder how a boy from the quiet, tidy suburbs of Oak Park, Illinois, a town of broad green lawns, neat wooden houses, and strict Protestant moral values managed to forge this brutal, honest, unflinching new language for American writing. Ernest Miller Hemingway was born on July 21, 1899, into a household built entirely of sharp, unresolvable contrasts. His father, Clarence Edmonds Hemingway, was a respected local physician, a quiet, disciplined man and a passionate naturalist. Dr. Hemingway loved the outdoors more than he loved the confines of his office. He taught his young son to hunt small game in the Michigan woods, to fish the clear, cold streams of the northern countryside, to track animals by their prints and their scent, to read the weather and the water and the trees. He taught Ernest to respect the wild things he hunted, to kill cleanly when he killed, to take only what he needed from the land. It was a masculine world of quiet action, physical skill, self-reliance, and unspoken fortitude. It was a world without sentimentality, without softness, without unnecessary words. Ernest learned early that worth lay in what a man could do, not what he could say. His mother, Grace Hall Hemingway, stood in complete opposition to this world. She was a trained music teacher with grand artistic ambitions for herself and her children. She was domineering, passionate, controlling, and frequently at bitter odds with her young, stubborn son. Grace Hemingway loved beauty, music, poetry, and theatrical performance. She valued grace, refinement, and emotional expression in a way her husband and young son never did. When Ernest was a toddler, she often dressed him in frilly, feminine clothes. She sometimes treated him and his older sister as twin girls, blurring the lines of gender and identity in the quiet Oak Park home. Biographers have studied this detail endlessly, probing for the roots of Hemingway's lifelong obsession with masculine identity, his relentless need to prove his strength, his courage, his toughness to the world. There is truth in that reading. The constant push and pull between his father's rugged outdoor masculinity and his mother's refined, artistic femininity created a lifelong tension inside him. Out of that tension, out of that daily conflict between two opposing worlds, something essential was forged in the boy's character. He would spend every year of his adult life proving himself a man, over and over again, often to a punishing, self-destructive degree. He shunned softness. He shunned vulnerability. He shunned any trait that might be read as weak or feminine. He built his identity on action, endurance, and stoic silence, a direct reaction to the divided household of his childhood. Ernest Hemingway never attended college. He finished high school in Oak Park, turned his back on the quiet academic life his family expected, and left home to find work and find himself. He traveled to Kansas City and took a job as a cub reporter for the Kansas City Star, a respected local newspaper with strict, uncompromising writing standards. The paper maintained a short style sheet. For every new reporter, a list of non-negotiable rules that shaped every word published in its pages. The rules were simple, brutal, and revolutionary for their time. Use short sentences. Use short first paragraphs. Use vigorous English. Be positive, not negative. Hemingway did not merely follow these rules. He drank them into his bones. He internalized them completely, until they were no longer professional guidelines but instinct, second nature, the very way he saw and described the world. The newspaper taught him to write clean. It taught him to cut every redundant word, every lazy modifier, every vague phrase. It taught him to let hard, specific facts carry all the emotional and narrative weight. He learned to trust concrete detail over abstract emotion. He learned that plain language was stronger than decorated language. He later said openly that those simple newspaper rules were the best writing instruction he ever received, the foundation of every book, every story, every sentence he would ever write for the rest of his career. All of his later genius lay dormant in those early newspaper days, germinating quietly in the short, sharp paragraphs he wrote for local news. A decade later, that same disciplined, stripped-down prose would stun the literary world and redefine American writing forever. But before he could become a revolutionary writer, before he could reshape language, the world itself had to be shattered. The First World War arrived as a brutal forge, hammering both the young man and the emerging writer into permanent shape. The romantic ideals of honor, glory, and sacrifice that young men of his generation were taught to believe in were burned away in the mud and gunfire of the European front lines. Hemingway volunteered to serve as an ambulance driver for the American Red Cross, choosing active service over a safe civilian life at home. He was assigned to the Italian front, a stretch of war marked by brutal trench fighting, constant artillery fire, cold rain, mud, and unrelenting human suffering. On July 8, 1918, just days before his 19th birthday, he was working in a forward trench, distributing chocolate bars and cigarettes to exhausted Italian soldiers huddled in the dirt. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and wet earth. The sound of distant artillery rumbled constantly in the background. Without warning, an Austrian mortar shell landed yards from his position and exploded. The blast tore through the trench, sending shrapnel flying in every direction. By most accounts, more than 200 pieces of metal pierced Hemingway's body in that single instant. He was wounded badly, bleeding heavily, in terrible pain. But he did not fall. He did not collapse immediately. Through sheer will and youthful stamina, he lifted a severely wounded Italian soldier onto his shoulders and carried the man to safety behind the lines before his body finally gave out. For this act of courage, he was awarded the Italian Silver Medal of Valor, one of the highest military honors the country could bestow on a foreign volunteer. He spent months recovering in a Milan hospital, lying in a narrow military bed, healing from physical wounds that would leave lifelong scars and invisible psychological damage. During his long recovery, he fell in love with a Red Cross nurse named Agnes von Kurowski, a kind, steady woman 7 years older than him. The young Hemingway loved her fiercely, naively, completely. He dreamed of marrying her, of building a quiet life together after the war ended. But when he returned to America, Agnes wrote to end their relationship. She told him he was too young, too inexperienced, not ready for the serious commitment she needed. The rejection cut deeper than any shrapnel wound. It left a hollow place in his chest that never fully healed. That intense wartime love and its bitter, final ending became the core emotional truth of A Farewell to Arms, the heartbreak that would power his greatest war novel. When he returned home to Oak Park after the war, he was welcomed as a local hero. Neighbors praised his bravery. Family members admired his service. Reporters asked for his war stories. But the boy who had left Illinois full of romantic hope returned a hollow man till he could not sleep through the night. He would lie awake for hours, replaying the mortar blast, the screams of wounded men, the endless mud and rain of the front lines. He could not speak honestly about what he had seen and felt. The war stripped him of every youthful illusion. It gave him a lifelong, obsessive preoccupation with death, with courage under extreme pressure, with the physical reality of wounding, pain, and human survival. For the rest of his writing life, he would return again and again to that single moment of explosion, the strange, almost religious sensation of feeling his soul separate from his body in the face of sudden, violent death. He came to distrust all abstract, noble words. Words like glory, honor, courage, sacrifice, patriotism. He learned that these words were empty, corrupted by wartime propaganda and political lies. They meant nothing when set beside the concrete truths of war, the specific names of bombed villages, the numbered military roads, the winding river courses, the regiment numbers, the exact dates of battle and defeat. The war taught him that true truth lived only in tangible, sensory detail. Truth lived in what you could see, touch, smell, hear, and feel with your own body. Truth did not need commentary. Truth did not need explanation. Present the facts plainly, and the facts would speak for themselves. After the war, Hemingway could not settle into the quiet routine of small-town American life. He was restless, hungry for experience, hungry for literary greatness, unable to tolerate the dull normalcy of Oak Park. He married Hadley Richardson, a gentle, loyal, supportive woman 8 years his senior. Hadley believed completely in his writing talent, encouraging him through every early struggle, every rejection, every quiet doubt. In 1921, the young couple left America behind and moved to Paris, France. Hemingway traveled officially as a foreign correspondent for the Toronto Star, writing news dispatches to pay their living expenses. But his real, unspoken purpose was far larger. He went to Paris to become a great writer. He went to immerse himself in the most vibrant artistic scene the modern world had ever known. Paris in the 1920s was a city of staggering creative fertility, a melting pot for painters, poets, novelists, and revolutionaries of every artistic kind. The old Victorian literary traditions were dying. Modern art and modern writing were being born in the cafes, salons, and narrow streets of the left bank. Gertrude Stein held legendary court in her salon at 27 Rue de Fleuris, surrounded by the groundbreaking paintings of Cézanne, Picasso, and Matisse. James Joyce labored endlessly over the complex, revolutionary prose of Ulysses, rewriting and refining every sentence for years. Ezra Pound reinvented modern poetry with sharp, economical language and radical new forms. F. Scott Fitzgerald had just published This Side of Paradise, becoming the defining voice of young post-war American youth. Into this boiling, brilliant cultural chaos stepped Ernest Hemingway. Young, hungry, intense, quiet, observant, a careful listener and a relentless learner. He sought out Gertrude Stein, and she took him under her wing. She became his first true literary mentor, and later, his complicated literary rival. Stein taught him to look at visual art with a writer's eye. She taught him to study post-impressionist paintings, to understand composition, planes of light, structural simplicity, and the power of arranging basic elements to create overwhelming emotional force. The quiet, layered landscapes of Cézanne had a profound, lasting impact on Hemingway's prose style. He learned to describe outdoor scenes with the same structured clarity, the same subtle depth, the same restrained beauty that defined Cézanne's brushwork. He learned to build a landscape sentence the way a painter builds a canvas. Simple elements led together to create a vast, immersive whole. He later admitted openly that he learned nearly everything he knew about descriptive landscape writing from staring at Cézanne's paintings in Stein's Paris salon. But the greatest gift Gertrude Stein ever gave Hemingway was a single, unforgettable phrase. One afternoon, speaking of the young generation of men who had come of age fighting in the First World War, she turned to him and said, "All of you young people who served in the war, you are a lost generation." Hemingway seized that phrase immediately. He recognized its truth, its weight, its perfect description of his generation's spiritual emptiness and disillusionment. He used the line as one of two epigraphs for his first major novel, The Sun Also Rises, and in doing so, he permanently embedded the term the lost generation into global literary and cultural vocabulary. The lost generation was a generation stripped of inherited moral values, wounded deeply by the horror of modern war, adrift in a world that no longer made traditional sense. These young men and women wandered through European cities aimlessly, chasing sensation, chasing pleasure, chasing any real feeling that could pull them free from the numbness of post-war trauma. They drank too much, loved too recklessly, argued too bitterly, and searched endlessly for meaning in a world that had abandoned all old certainties. In 1926, The Sun Also Rises was published, and overnight, Hemingway became famous across America and Europe. On the surface, The Sun Also Rises is a simple story with no grand plot, no dramatic twists, no heroic resolution. A loose group of American and British expatriates drifts through Paris, drinking in cafes, sleeping restlessly, arguing over small slights and larger heartbreaks. They travel together to Pamplona, Spain, to watch the annual running of the bulls and the brutal, ritual bullfights that define the town's identity. They fish in quiet mountain rivers, they dance in crowded bars, they fall in and out of casual, hollow relationships. They live without purpose, without direction, without hope. The novel's narrator is Jake Barnes, an American journalist permanently wounded in the war. His injury is invisible to the world but devastating to his life. It has left him impotent, unable to physically love the woman he adores. Jake is deeply in love with Lady Brett Ashley, a beautiful, fiercely independent, sexually liberated Englishwoman. Brett loves Jake in return, fiercely and honestly, but she cannot bring herself to commit to a life without physical intimacy. The two orbit each other endlessly, bound by love and separated by irreversible loss. They are the center of a small circle of damaged, rootless souls, all revolving around an empty emotional core. There are no traditional story arcs here. No one finds redemption. No one achieves happiness. No one learns a grand moral lesson. The novel simply drifts forward, like the aimless lives of its characters, until it stops abruptly in a Madrid taxi. In the final scene, Brett turns to Jake and says, "Oh, Jake, we could have had such a damned good time together." And Jake replies, quiet and resigned, "Yes. Isn't it pretty to think so?" That final exchange is a perfect, flawless masterclass in the iceberg theory of writing. On the surface, The words are casual, almost offhand, flat and conversational. Beneath the quiet, ironic simplicity lies an ocean of unspoken grief, wasted longing, quiet bitterness, and the clear-eyed, unflinching acceptance of irreversible loss. The novel never preaches to the reader. It never explains the character's pain. It never tells you how to feel. It simply shows you these broken people, drinking and talking and watching bulls die in the ring, living out their empty days in a broken post-war world. The bullfight emerges as the book's central symbolic ritual, a controlled, structured violence that imposes temporary order on a chaotic, meaningless existence. The young matador Pedro Romero stands apart from the expatriate crowd. He is disciplined, pure, skilled, graceful under pressure. He faces the violent danger of the ring with calm dignity and perfect craft. He represents everything the lost generation has lost: purpose, honor, self-respect, and the ability to live with integrity amid chaos. He is the quiet hero of the novel, standing in stark contrast to Jake's circle of self-destructive, aimless drifters. The prose style of The Sun Also Rises is lean, journalistic, stripped to its core. It relies almost entirely on sparse dialogue and minimal, precise descriptive passages. The novel's dialogue is legendary for its deliberate indirectness. The characters never say exactly what they mean. They repeat trivial phrases. They evade hard truths. They hint at pain instead of speaking it. All real emotion lives in the gaps between their words, in the unspoken tensions hanging in the air. Every page adheres strictly to the iceberg principle, and the book transformed American fiction completely the moment it reached readers' hands. With this single novel, Hemingway became the official chronicler of his generation, the cool, detached, unflinching voice of post-war disillusionment. But even as the public labeled him the poet of the lost generation, he was already moving forward, refining his craft beyond that narrow definition. His short story writing would prove even more influential than his novels, redefining the possibilities of modern short fiction forever. The stories collected in Our Time, published in 1925, followed later by Men Without Women and Winner Take Nothing, stand among the finest short stories ever written in any language, in any era. These stories are clean, hard, merciless, and unflinchingly honest. They waste no words, indulge no sentiment, explain no emotion. Consider the classic short story The Killers, one of Hemingway's most celebrated works. Two professional hitmen walk into a small-town American lunchroom on an ordinary evening. They take over the quiet space, ordering the staff around, waiting silently for a man named Ole Andre Sun, whom they have been hired to kill. The dialogue is flat, monotone, rhythmic, and quietly threatening. There are no dramatic threats, no loud declarations, no obvious malice. The danger simmers beneath every plain sentence. "What you want to eat?" "Oh," one hitman asks. The other replies, "I don't know. I don't know what I want to eat." The exchange is mundane, ordinary, completely unremarkable on the surface. Yet it builds unbearable tension in the reader's chest. The story is a perfect lesson in literary restraint. It provides no backstory for the hitman. It explains no motive for the killing. It offers no moral judgment, no resolution, no final explanation. When the young boy Nick Adams, warns Ole Andre's son of the killers waiting for him. The older man does not run, does not fight, does not argue. He simply lies on his boarding house bed, faces the wall, and accepts his fate. There isn't anything I can do, he says quietly. He has resigned himself to death. He has endured enough struggle to know some battles cannot be won. Some fates cannot be escaped. The story ends with Nick walking away from the boarding house, shocked and hollowed out by the encounter, leaving the reader trapped in the same cold, empty silence. There is no hope, no redemption, no closure. Only the hard, plain fact of men who kill and a man who waits quietly to be killed. Equally masterful is Hills Like White Elephants, a story constructed almost entirely of unbroken dialogue. There is minimal description, no internal monologue, no explicit explanation of the conflict at the story's center. A man and a young woman sit together at a small Spanish railway station on a hot, dry afternoon. They wait for a train. They drink cold beer and anise liqueur. They talk casually about the distant hills, about the taste of their drinks, about the weather, about trivial, meaningless things. They talk about everything except the single heavy secret hanging between them. The unspoken subject is an abortion. The man wants the woman to undergo the operation. He insists it is simple, safe, uncomplicated. He tells her they will be happy again afterward, that their life will return to normal. The woman stares. Out at the pale, rounded hills stretching across the dry Spanish plain, and says quietly that the hills look like white elephants. She doubts the future he promises. She wonders if anything can ever be normal again. She hesitates, grieves, struggles silently with her choice. Finally, she agrees to the operation. Then I'll do it. Because I don't care about me, she says. The words carry every ounce of her sorrow, her resignation, her lost hope. The train arrives in 5 minutes. The story ends without resolution, without explanation, without comfort. Hemingway never writes the word abortion. He never tells the reader exactly what the characters feel. He simply lets their careful, evasive words hang thick in the hot, still air. The reader feels every pound of their shared misery, the impossible emotional distance between them, the quiet death of their love and their future. The story is a miracle of literary compression. It spans only a few printed pages, yet it contains the full weight of a novel's worth of human pain, regret, and broken connection. Nearly all of Hemingway's greatest short fiction centers on human beings trapped in moments of quiet crisis. His stories unfold in remote wildernesses, dusty bullrings, muddy battlefields, quiet roadside cafes, and lonely hotel rooms. They explore the concept Hemingway defined as grace under pressure, his personal definition of true courage. Courage, for Hemingway, was never the absence of fear. It was not the lack of doubt or pain, or terror. True courage was the ability to control fear. It was the discipline to do what must be done, to complete the hard task, to maintain dignity and self-respect even when the entire world collapses into chaos and suffering around you. His iconic heroes are almost always physically wounded or psychologically scarred. They carry invisible damage from war, loss, failure, and betrayal. But they live by a strict, unspoken personal code. They fish with careful, practiced precision. They hunt with quiet ritual and respect for the wild. They face injury, loss, and even death without complaint. They rarely speak of their feelings. They never analyze their own pain. They act with integrity and discipline, and through their actions alone, the reader understands their character, their strength, their humanity. This personal code of stoic, unemotional masculinity has become one of the most widely debated elements of Hemingway's literary legacy. For some critics and readers, Hemingway's code is a noble existential philosophy. It is a deliberate choice to embrace life's intensity, to find dignity and meaning in action, even in the face of universal emptiness and inevitable death. For others, the code is rigid, limiting, and often toxic. It enforces a narrow, performative version of manhood that rejects vulnerability, softness, and emotional openness. It leaves little room for complex female characters, for nuanced human emotion, for the full spectrum of human weakness and tenderness. Both interpretations hold truth. Hemingway's fictional world is overwhelmingly male, centered on male experience, male struggle, male courage, and failure. His female characters are often viewed through the limited lens of male desire, male fear, or male loss. Lady Brett Ashley is a brilliantly complex character, sharp and independent and deeply human. Yet she also functions as a destructive force in the male characters' lives. The women in his short stories shift between loyal companions, deceptive betrayers, and ghostly, distant presences. Critics have rightly faulted Hemingway for failing to craft fully realized, deeply interior female characters for most of his career. There are exceptional cases, most notably Pilar Inn, for whom the bell tolls, a fierce, wise, earthy Spanish woman who stands as the novel's clear moral center, stronger and more grounded than any of the male fighters around her. The ongoing debate over Hemingway's portrayal of gender is a vital part of his legacy. To read his work honestly today is to confront both the unmatched brilliance of his stylistic craft and the clear limitations of his thematic vision. The genius and the flaw exist side by side, inseparable, creating the layered tension that makes his work endlessly fascinating to new generations of readers. Diane, 1929. Hemingway published A Farewell to Arms, the novel many scholars and readers consider his greatest sustained literary achievement. It is a quiet, devastating meditation on war and love, on loss and survival, on the fragile, temporary peace human beings try to build amid endless chaos. The novel is narrated in the first person by Frederick Henry, a young American serving as an ambulance driver on the Italian front during the First World War. Frederick is a classic Hemingway hero, detached, ironic, observant, emotionally reserved, a non-combatant who watches the brutality of war with a clear, unromantic eye. Frederick meets Catherine Barclay, a gentle, thoughtful English nurse working in the military hospital where he receives treatment. What begins as a casual wartime flirtation deepens gradually, under the constant pressure of violence and uncertainty, into an intense, almost mystical love. The war strips away trivial social pretense, leaving only raw human connection. Hemingway's prose reaches new heights of lyrical clarity and restrained beauty in this novel. He paints landscape scenes with the precise, layered clarity of a Cezanne painting, grounding every emotional moment in tangible physical detail. Rain falls steadily throughout the entire book, a constant, quiet symbol of death, decay, and inevitable dissolution. The rain soaks the battlefields, the mountain roads, the hospital rooms, the quiet Swiss valleys where the lovers seek refuge. It hangs over every scene, a silent reminder that suffering and loss are inescapable parts of human life. The dialogue between Frederick and Catherine carries a hypnotic, ritualistic rhythm. Their quiet conversations become a private language, a small, safe world they build together to resist the chaos and violence of the war surrounding them. They create their own separate peace, fragile and temporary and infinitely precious. The novel contains one of the most vivid, harrowing, and technically perfect battle sequences in all of world literature, the chaotic, nightmarish retreat from Caporetto. The entire Italian army collapses into panicked disarray. Soldiers flee in terror, abandoning weapons, abandoning formation, abandoning all military order. Military police patrol the roads, hunting down deserting officers and executing them on the spot without trial or mercy. Hemingway renders the entire nightmare with documentary precision. You feel the thick mud clinging to every boot. You feel the cold rain soaking every uniform. You hear the screams of panicked men, the rumble of artillery, the sharp crack of execution gunfire. Trapped in the middle of the collapsing retreat, Frederick chooses to save himself. He dives into the cold, rushing river to escape the military police, abandoning his uniform, his rank, his duty to the crumbling army. In that single moment, he declares his own personal armistice. He walks away from the war entirely. I was through, he thinks quietly. I wished them all the luck. There were the good ones, and the brave ones, and the calm ones and the sensible ones, and they deserved it. But it was not my show anymore. He leaves the war behind completely, fleeing with Catherine to neutral Switzerland. For a brief, perfect season, they live in peaceful isolation in a small mountain chalet. They walk through snow-covered forests each morning. They sit by the fire each evening. They exist entirely for each other, untouched by the violence and grief of the outside world. It is the happiest, purest period of connection either character will ever know. But the world's cruelty cannot be outrun forever. Catherine becomes pregnant, and for a time, their happiness seems complete. When she goes into labor, every possible thing goes wrong. The labor drags on for hours, brutal and exhausting. The baby is stillborn, lifeless and silent. Catherine suffers a catastrophic hemorrhage after the delivery. The doctors fight to save her life, but their efforts fail. One by one, Frederick loses his child and his lover, the two things that gave his peaceful new life meaning. The novel ends with Frederick alone in the hospital room, staring at Catherine's still body, before walking slowly back to his hotel through the cold, steady rain. The final paragraph remains one of the most devastating, perfectly restrained endings in all of fiction. Every unnecessary word is cut away, leaving only stark, pure truth. Frederick sends the nurses away, insisting on sitting alone with Catherine's body. It was like saying goodbye to a statue. After a while I went out and left the hospital and walked back to the hotel in the rain. There are no screams of grief, no dramatic declarations of sorrow, no philosophical reflections on loss or fate. Only the rain, the empty walk, the silent hotel waiting at the end of the street. The reader is left with a vast, echoing emptiness, a grief so heavy it cannot be named or spoken. The Iceberg Theory achieves its purest form here. Nearly all the emotion is submerged beneath the plain, unadorned sentences. What remains visible is spare, quiet, and infinitely powerful. Hemingway famously rewrote this final ending 39 separate times, refining and stripping and simplifying until every single unnecessary word was gone. The final version is the ultimate proof of his core belief. Emotion felt by the reader is always deeper and truer than emotion stated outright by the writer. The overwhelming critical and commercial success of A Farewell to Arms cemented Hemingway's status as a towering major figure in 20th century literature. But the 1930s proved to be a difficult, restless, creatively uneven decade for him. He published Death in the Afternoon, a sweeping, meditative non-fiction work exploring Spanish bullfighting as a ritual art form, a meditation on violence, beauty, courage, and death. The book is a non-fiction masterpiece, rich with observation, philosophy, and quiet wisdom about human ritual and mortality. He followed it with Green Hills of Africa, a creative non-fiction account of his big game hunting safari across the African continent. In this book, he attempted to do for African landscapes what he had done for Spanish villages and Italian battlefields, capture the raw, unvarnished truth of a place through plain, precise, unromantic prose. But his fictional work faltered during this period. His novel To Have and Have Not, a story of economic struggle and survival set in Depression-era Key West, Florida, received largely negative critical reviews and failed to live up to his earlier literary standards. Hemingway grew increasingly restless and distracted throughout the 30s. He split his time between Key West and Cuba, fishing for giant marlin in the Caribbean waters, hunting big game on occasional expeditions, drinking heavily, engaging in public brawls and casual boxing matches. His public persona began to overshadow his literary work entirely. The image of Papa Hemingway, the bearded, broad-chested, rugged outdoorsman, the fearless hunter, the hard-drinking adventurer, became a national celebrity brand. Major national magazines like Life and Esquire printed his face on their covers, ran his articles, and celebrated his larger-than-life personality. He became a myth in his own lifetime, a cultural icon far bigger than his books. He often leaned into this public image, playing the rugged celebrity for journalists and fans, sometimes at the cost of his writing discipline. There is a dangerous trap in becoming a legend while you are still alive. The public expectation of who you are supposed to be becomes a prison, limiting who you can truly be and what you can create. Hemingway was perpetually torn between the strict, solitary discipline of the serious artist and the endless physical and emotional appetites of the man. He drank to excess for decades. He engaged in countless extramarital affairs. His first marriage to Hadley Richardson ended in divorce after he fell in love with her close friend Pauline Pfeiffer, who became his second wife. This painful pattern of loving, leaving, and remarrying repeated itself throughout his entire adult life. He could be impossibly generous, kind, and loyal to friends and strangers alike. He could also be cruel, selfish, and unforgivingly harsh. He carried deep, quiet sensitivity beneath his tough exterior, yet he frequently succumbed to violent outbursts and emotional cruelty. He was a walking collection of contradictions, tender and brutal, loyal and disloyal, disciplined and self-indulgent, thoughtful and reckless. These internal conflicts wore on him constantly, slowly unraveling his peace and his creative focus. Then the Spanish Civil War erupted in 1936, igniting new purpose and new creative fire within him. Fascist military forces led by General Francisco Franco launched a violent rebellion against Spain's democratically elected Republican government. The country fractured brutally, splitting neighbor from neighbor, family from family, friend from friend in a bitter, bloody civil conflict. Hemingway was a lifelong anti-fascist, a committed supporter of democratic freedom against authoritarian tyranny. He traveled to Spain immediately as a foreign correspondent for the North American Newspaper Alliance, determined to witness and document the war firsthand. In Spain, he fell deeply in love with the Republican cause, with the ordinary Spanish people fighting and dying for their freedom. He also fell in love with Martha Gellhorn, a brilliant, fearless fellow war journalist who would become his third wife. The raw heroism, terrible betrayal, senseless cruelty, and quiet human courage he witnessed in the Spanish mountains and villages reshape his writing entirely. Out of the blood and dust and sacrifice of the Spanish Civil War, he crafted his largest, most ambitious, most sweeping novel, For Whom the Bell Tolls, published in 1940. The novel unfolds across a tight, focused timeline of 4 days and 3 nights, adhering to classical dramatic unity of time, place, and action. The protagonist is Robert Jordan, an American volunteer dynamiter attached to a small band of Spanish Republican guerrillas fighting in the remote mountain ranges of Spain. His single, vital mission is to destroy a strategic bridge during a scheduled Republican offensive, cutting off fascist troop reinforcements and turning the tide of the battle. Over 3 desperate days and nights, Jordan lives and fights alongside the peasant guerrillas, learning their courage, their fear, their loyalty, their petty conflicts, and their quiet humanity. He falls deeply in love with Maria, a young Spanish girl brutalized and traumatized by fascist soldiers early in the war. Their love story is tender, fragile, and intensely sincere, a pure connection forged amid unspeakable violence and suffering. Hemingway took enormous stylistic risks with this novel's dialogue. The peasant characters speak Spanish in their daily lives, but Hemingway renders their speech informal, archaic English using thee and thou to mirror the formal intimacy of Spanish linguistic conventions. It is a bold, unorthodox choice that could easily have failed, but it works perfectly. It creates a subtle sense of cultural distance, a feeling of translated authenticity that honors the character's native voice without artificial modernization. The novel is populated by unforgettable, fully human characters. Pilar, the tough, wise, earthy female guerrilla leader, serves as the moral heart and soul of the band. She is strong, compassionate, unflinching in the face of death, deeply loyal to her people. Her husband Pablo is worn down by years of war, exhausted by violence, obsessed only with surviving at any cost. El Sordo, the deaf guerrilla captain, fights a legendary, heroic last stand on a lonely hilltop, dying bravely rather than surrendering to fascist forces. Hemingway never romanticizes war in this novel, not even the war he passionately believed in. He shows cruelty and corruption on both sides of the conflict. He depicts the messy, compromised politics of wartime alliances, the cowardice of some fighters, the unexpected bravery of ordinary people. Above all, the novel explores the profound interconnectedness of all human life. Its title draws from John Donne's classic meditation on human unity. No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Robert Jordan begins the novel as a solitary individualist, a man who fights alone, trusts only his own judgment, and values personal independence above all else. Over the course of his mission, he learns deeply that no one fights alone, no one suffers alone, no one dies alone. The lives of the Spanish peasants fighting beside him are inextricably bound to his own. Their losses diminish him. Their courage sustains him. Their humanity completes his OWN. In the novel's final moments, Jordan suffers a catastrophic leg injury during the bridge demolition, leaving him trapped on the hillside, unable to escape the approaching fascist patrol. He sends his comrades away to safety, choosing to stay behind and hold off the enemy advance to buy their retreat. He lies alone on the pine needle forest floor, machine gun ready, waiting calmly for the enemy soldiers to crest the hill. The novel ends on a note of unbearable, perfect tension, as he feels his heart beating steady and strong in his chest, facing certain death with clarity, purpose, and quiet dignity. It is the purest, most complete expression of Hemingway's personal code of grace. Under pressure, a man facing inevitable death without fear, without complaint, with full awareness of the sacrifice he makes for others. For Whom the Bell Tolls became an immediate massive bestseller and a universal critical triumph. Many literary critics believed it deserved the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, but Nicholas Murray Butler, head of the Pulitzer Prize Board, vetoed the award, offended by the novel's blunt, unpolished language. The unfair rejection stung Hemingway deeply, leaving a lasting bitterness. Even so, the novel secured his place among the greatest war novelists in American history. It successfully merged his spare, modernist prose technique with sweeping social and political weight, proving that the iceberg theory of writing could support the full gravity of human history, collective struggle, and moral purpose. After the Spanish Civil War ended, Hemingway traveled to China with Martha Gellhorn to document the growing conflict in East Asia. When the Second World War erupted across Europe and the Pacific, he returned to active wartime correspondence once again, refusing to stay safely on the sidelines. He outfitted his personal fishing boat, the Pillar, as a makeshift submarine hunter, patrolling the coastal waters off Cuba alone for German U-boats, scanning the dark ocean for enemy activity throughout the early years of the war. He later returned to Europe as an accredited war correspondent, embedding with the 22nd Regiment of the U.S. 4th Infantry Division. He witnessed the Normandy landings from the battlefield, arriving shortly after the first wave of troops hit the beaches. He was present for the brutal street fighting that liberated Paris from Nazi occupation. True to his lifelong pattern, Hemingway blurred the strict line between journalist and participant. Ignoring military rules for war correspondence, he led small bands of French resistance fighters in tactical operations, even establishing an informal command post at the famous Ritz Hotel in central Paris. He was celebrated for his bravery, investigated for breaking military protocol, and talked about everywhere as the boldest, most adventurous writer of his generation. Once again, the living legend overshadowed the careful artist beneath the public persona. After the end of World War II, Hemingway settled permanently in Cuba, at a spacious, quiet estate called Finca Vigia, or Lookout Farm, on the outskirts of Havana. He married his fourth and final wife, Mary Welsh, a thoughtful, steady correspondent for Time magazine. He was now the undisputed elder statesman of American letters, the most famous living writer in the United States. But his literary throne was already unsteady beneath him. In 1950, he published Across the River and Into the Trees, a novel following an aging American army colonel who falls in love with a young Venetian countess in post-war Italy. The book was met with near-universal critical mockery and disappointment. Critics dismissed it as self-parody, a tired, repetitive rehash of his old themes of love, war, aging, and loss. The prose that had once been crisp, original, and brutally honest now felt mannered, forced, and self-imitative. The dialogue rang hollow and artificial, a cheap copy of the classic Hemingway style. The novel was a public, humiliating failure. Critics and readers alike declared that Papa Hemingway was finished. They said his creative powers had faded with age. They wrote him off as a relic of the lost wartime generation, a writer whose best work was far behind him. But Hemingway had always thrived against doubt and defeat. He had spent his entire career proving critics wrong. He dug deep into his remaining creative reserves, determined to produce one final, perfect masterpiece to close his literary legacy. In 1952, Life magazine published a complete short novel in a single issue, releasing it to massive public and critical acclaim. The work was titled The Old Man and the Sea. It told the simple, timeless story of Santiago, an elderly Cuban fisherman living in a small coastal village. For 84 straight days, Santiago has returned home empty-handed, unable to catch a single fish. He is the unluckiest man in his village. Younger fishermen pity him. Townsfolk whisper that his fishing days are over. His only true companion is a young boy named Manolin, who once fished with him every day until his parents forbade it. Convinced the old man's bad luck will taint the boy's future, Santiago refuses to surrender to his bad luck or his old age. On the 85th day, he rows his small skiff far out into the deep waters of the Gulf Stream, farther than any other fisherman dares to go. He waits patiently, steadily, with the quiet discipline of a lifetime spent on the ocean. Before long, a massive marlin takes his bait. The fish is enormous, stronger than any Santiago has ever seen. It pulls the small boat relentlessly out to sea, dragging the old man far from shore. For 3 brutal, sleepless days and nights, Santiago struggles against the marlin in a battle of pure endurance and willpower. His hands are cut raw and bleeding from the thick fishing line. His back aches with constant strain. His body is exhausted, starved, and dehydrated. Yet he never loosens his grip. He never gives up. He speaks softly to the marlin throughout the struggle, treating the great fish as a noble brother, respecting its strength, its beauty, its dignity. Even as he knows he must kill it to survive, he thinks constantly of the boy Manolin, of the younger days when his strength was unbroken, of the lions he once saw playing on African beaches in his youth. Those distant memories sustain him through the darkest moments of his ordeal. On the 3rd day, the marlin finally tires. Santiago pulls the great fish close and kills it with a harpoon, ending their long, honorable battle. The marlin is far too large to fit inside his small skiff, so he lashes its massive body to the boat's side, preparing to sail. home victorious, but victory is not meant to last. The scent of the marlin's fresh blood draws sharks from the deep ocean. First one shark comes, then dozens more, swarming the small boat in a relentless feeding frenzy. Santiago fights back with every weapon he has. He stabs with his harpoon. He swings with his oar. He uses a broken knife. He strikes with his bare bleeding fists. He fights until his body has no strength left to fight. But the sharks are too many, too fast, too relentless to be. By the time Santiago struggles back to his home harbor at dawn, the entire flesh of the magnificent marlin has been devoured. All that remains is a massive, white, skeletal backbone and a long, pointed tail. The great fish he fought so hard to catch is gone, reduced to bare bone. Exhausted beyond measure, the old man stumbles back to his tiny shack, collapses on his narrow bed, and falls into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, wealthy tourists at the waterfront cafe stare at the giant skeleton lashed to the old man's boat, mistaking the marlin remains for a shark's frame, unaware of the epic battle that has taken place. Young Manolin finds the old man sleeping deeply, sees his wounded hands and exhausted face, and cries for him. He brings Santiago hot coffee and promises to defy his parents, returning to fish with the old man every day, lucky or not. The novel ends with Santiago sleeping peacefully, dreaming once again of young lions playing freely on the sunlit African sands. The Old Man and the Sea is a perfect, flawless work of art, a modern parable of human persistence, dignity, and spiritual victory in the face of inevitable physical defeat. It meditates on humanity's eternal relationship with nature, on the limits of physical strength, on the endless power of human spirit and discipline. The novel's most famous line, "A man can be destroyed but not defeated," has become a timeless mantra of human resilience. The phrase is endlessly quoted, often overused, but in the context of Santiago's three-day ordeal, every word is earned through pure, brutal struggle. The story was deeply personal for Hemingway. At an advanced age, written off by critics as a finished talent, he saw himself in the aging fisherman. He was the old man fighting the endless sea of critical doubt and declining physical strength, striving to land one final great work to prove his genius remained intact. The book became an unprecedented cultural phenomenon. It won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1953. In 1954, Hemingway was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, with the official citation honoring his mastery of the art of narrative, most recently demonstrated in The Old Man and the Sea, and for the influence that he has exerted on contemporary style. After decades of rigorous writing, relentless exploration, and constant stylistic innovation, his literary status was finally cemented on the world's highest literary stage. Tragically, the global glory and lifelong legend could not heal the deep wounds hidden in Hemingway's body and soul. The countless war injuries, repeated physical traumas from hunting, boxing, and maritime adventures, years of excessive drinking and irregular living, coupled with long-buried wartime PTSD and chronic depression, gradually eroded his physical and mental health. In his later years, he suffered from severe insomnia, anxiety, paranoia, and chronic pain, plagued by persistent mental torment that no medication or treatment could fully alleviate. The tough, stoic warrior who had endured countless physical wounds finally crumbled under the weight of invisible psychological suffering. In the late 1950s, Hemingway's condition deteriorated rapidly. He lost his once sharp creative insight, struggling to revise and polish his manuscripts, falling into endless self-doubt and self-denial. The man who had always defined himself by action, endurance, and unyielding strength could no longer sustain the stoic code he had adhered to all his life. After multiple futile treatments and unbearable mental agony, he chose the final quiet escape on the summer morning of 1961, ending his extraordinary, turbulent, and incomparably rich life at the age of 61. Hemingway's departure was not merely the end of a writer's life, but the close of an era of bold, unvarnished modern American literature. His literary legacy endures firmly across generations, unfaded by the passage of time. He revolutionized English prose, stripping it of empty ornamentation and restoring the power of plain, precise, and truthful language. His Iceberg Theory redefined the relationship between writers, words, and readers, teaching countless creators that the most profound emotions and truths often lie in the silent gaps between lines. His unique code of courage, grace under extreme pressure, dignity amid chaos, resilience in the face of inevitable defeat, has become a timeless spiritual symbol beyond literary boundaries. Though his works bear the marks of his times, with limitations in thematic perspective and character creation, his stylistic genius, his sincere observation of human survival, and his unflinching portrayal of pain, love, struggle, and loss transcend temporal and cultural barriers. Today, decades after his death, Hemingway's novels and short stories remain essential reading for literary learners and lovers worldwide. He was a man of countless contradictions, adventurous yet fragile, ruthless yet tender, legendary in public yet tormented in private. But above all, he was a faithful recorder of human life, a dedicated craftsman of language, and a lifelong pursuer of dignity in struggle. His legend is not built on fame and hype, but forged from real-life experience, sincere writing, and the unbreakable human spirit embedded in every plain and powerful sentence he left behind.